All right. We are ready to call the meeting to order. We're here at Town Council Chambers for Freeport Town Council meeting number 15-23. Today is Tuesday, August 1st. With us tonight, we have Councilor Pillsbury. Present. Councilor Lawrence.
Here.
Councilor Daniele. Here. Councilor Bradley. Here. Councilor Egan.
Yes, here.
Chair Pilch is here, and Councilor Fournier is excused tonight. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Right. Next up, we have a motion to waive the reading of the minutes of meeting number 14-23 held on July 25th and to accept the minutes as printed.
So moved.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilor Lawrence. Thank you, Councilor Bradley. Any discussion on the minutes, corrections, notes? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye. And any opposed or abstain? That's everybody 6-0. That passes. Next up, I have a few announcements. First up, regarding property tax stabilization for senior citizens. The LD 290 property tax stabilization for senior citizens program, enacted in August of 2022, was repealed by the Maine legislature on July 6, 2023, effective October 11th, 2023. The popularly regarded program had allowed Maine seniors 65 and older who owned a permanent residence for at least 10 years and was receiving or eligible for a homestead exemption to freeze taxes at the previous year's level, regardless of income. The repeal of this program means there is no reapplication process and no need to follow up with the assessing department in August or September as previously thought. Though the program has been repealed, your initial application will still be administered this year for the upcoming tax commitment for the tax year 2023 and 24. It's important to note that these are state programs, and while the town plays a role in their administration, the town is not responsible for the policy objectives of these initiatives. Owners' questions or concerns regarding this program should be directed to your legislative representative. That's that. Also, the library is looking for part-time help at the front desk. Visit their website for more info. And also visit the library on August 4th between 10 and 12 to learn about the Affordable Connectivity Program. This program offers eligible Maine families $30 a month off their internet bill. Drop in to learn more about the program, find out if you qualify, and what information you'll need to have ready to complete your application. There is a workshop tomorrow night, August 2nd at 6 p.m. regarding new state rules that will affect housing production in Freeport. We will be learning about Maine's new LD 2003 law and looking for public input on the future of housing in Freeport. For more information, contact the Freeport Planning Department. That's a workshop tomorrow at the Planning Board meeting specifically for LD 2003. We are always in search of individuals interested in serving their community by serving on a board or committee that matches their interest. Be advised, we have openings on the Board of Appeals, Board of Assessment Review, Cable Regulatory, Conservation Commission, Police Advisory Student Associate Member, Voter Registration Appeal Board. Please contact the clerk's office for more information. Those are all the announcements I have. Do any other counselors have announcements tonight?
Yeah.
Yes, Councilor Lawrence.
Freeport Players are doing Love and Lobsters, not this weekend, but starting the 11th, 12th, and 13th, and then the following weekend. Come down and see the show. The backdrop is unbelievable for the show. My wife did it, so I had to put a plug in there. So anyway, it's very nice, but come and see the show. It's a local playwright.
At the FPAC or at Meeting House?
At the FPAC.
At the FPAC. Councilor Egan.
This Saturday, August 5th, there'll be live music in the park, Memorial Park downtown, from 12 to 4 p.m., sponsored by Meeting House Arts. 4 different groups playing, and it's been a program that's been going first Saturday in alignment with the Makers on Main for a Saturday event. And I think the weather is going to improve by the time the music starts at noon. So come down and join us. Free music in the park.
Any other announcements? We'll move on to our fourth order of business, which is information exchange. Do any counselors have any information to exchange? Jake, do you want to talk about communications, or you want me to do that?
Go for it, Mr. Chair.
Counselor Daniele and I met with our town manager and assistant manager to work up a job description for the communications and community engagement coordinator position, which we hope to have posted soon and hired soon after that. So excited to finally get that going. That's all I've got for information exchange. Anybody else? All right. Seeing none, we'll move on to the public comment period.
Town manager.
Oh, we have the town manager's report first. Thank you, Counselor.
Don't worry, I'll keep it short
have some
since
things
you're in
to
a
say.
hurry. So just to follow up on what Councilor Egan said, when I was on a call last week with the Street Gang, which is just a conglomerate of people that have interest in different things in downtown, we realized there's a lot of stuff going on in Freeport on August 5th. In addition to the Meeting House Arts concert, there's Makers on Main, and there's also a concert expected at Elo Bean, which we anticipate will draw a large crowd. So just a heads up, it's going to be a busy traffic day in downtown Freeport. So hopefully you can join in the fun, and if not, plan accordingly. We have an update from Baker Tilly. The applications are, I can't remember, sorry, what their final date was, but the first review of applications is going to start on August 10th. I think they have a few more days if you're interested in applying for town manager. So far, we've received 47 applications. Those have come to Baker Tilly. They do plan on having Baker Tilly at your September 5th town council meeting and executive session to have the council narrow down the candidates that they want to bring in for a town manager interview. And then the only other thing I have is, in case you hadn't heard, we had a visitor in town on Friday. The president came to Freeport. It was a very interesting experience. The Secret Service informed us that it was the first time a president had come to Freeport. And I just want to thank our municipal departments for all the work they did. A lot of work went in behind the scenes to help support those efforts. They look at basically public safety departments to do certain things when the president comes to town. And so Nate Goodman and Paul Conley really stepped up. They worked with the Secret Service all week on many scenarios and evolving plans as the week went on. A lot of staff was required to come in and work, even if they had other plans or scheduled days off. So thanks to our staff, it was a long, hot day outside for some of our officers that needed to come in and do traffic control. And then just, thanks to most of our staff across the board for being so flexible. When you have a big guest like that coming into Freeport, there's some things that cause your plans to be altered. And, we delayed a bridge project just to make sure the Burnett Road Bridge was passable when the president was here, and we had some people doing other things, at the drop of a hat. So just want to acknowledge our staff for helping to coordinate and pull that visit off, and recognizing our public safety team because they really did most of the work. That's all.
Questions for the manager? Okay, now we can move on to our public comment period. A time for the public to address the council on anything they want. Everybody gets 3 minutes to come up to the podium or raise their hand on Zoom. Is there anybody in the room who wants to publicly comment, or anybody on Zoom who wants to publicly comment? Seeing none, I will continue marching through the agenda. Seventh order of business is where we take all our votes. So we have following item of business. The first of which is item 142-23 regarding adopting our consent agenda, which tonight I think just has one item on it, which is a liquor license renewal for Mass Landing Brewing. I'm not going to ask if we should consider it separately since there's only one item on it. So Councilor Pillsbury, do you want to move our consent agenda?
Absolutely. Be it ordered that the August 1st, 2023 consent agenda be adopted.
Second.
Thank you, Councilor Lawrence. Any discussion about the Mass Landing Brewing liquor license renewal? All in favor of our consent agenda?
Aye.
Any opposed? 6-0, that carries as well. I'll send down the paperwork for you guys to sign. Next up, I'd like to ask to take a non-agenda item and put it on our agenda, which we can do if we all vote to do so. So we have, I think it made it into your packet, but it was too late for the agenda. There's a request for town property from RSU, is it RSU 5 or Adult Education? Freeport Community Programs, to use Memorial Park for a graduation ceremony for adult ed students. It's a standard form. Usually we would do this on a consent agenda, but since it was last minute, we didn't have time to get it on there. So first, I'll make a motion to add this as an item to our agenda.
I'll second.
Thank you, Councilor Egan. Any opposition, discussion to that? All in favor of adding the item?
Aye.
Okay, thank you. And then I know we've got Peter Widener in the audience in case we do have questions on the use of the park. Does anybody have questions on that? Councilor Bradley?
Yeah, I don't have a question. I have a comment. And Peter, you probably know where I'm coming from, but it's things like this that emphasize to me how important communication and cooperation between RSU and the town is, that there are interests that both the town and RSU share that are critically important to the people. This is one of them. You know, there's absolutely no reason in my mind and this should be denied. But it brings to mind a recent request that the town made to the RSU that was denied, and suggests to me that perhaps there's a need for some sort of talk between the RSU and the town about how to deal with common issues where one or the other has a problem. Fireworks was a jarring event for me as a counselor who's used to thinking of RSU and the town as a single entity and finding out it wasn't. And, you know, without commenting on the merits of that decision, that's not my point, but that the process was one that was not satisfying. And I don't know whether you agree with that or you don't, but I would like to suggest that we find a way informally to start a discussion about RSU and the town's common interests when they diverge or they're perceived to diverge by one party or the other. So having said that, I fully support this. I think this is a great thing. Thank you for bringing it forward. But unfortunately, it gave me an opportunity to talk about an experience that I just had as a member of a council trying to do something for all the people in the town that didn't get very far. So if you'd care to comment on my suggestion, I'd be glad to hear it. If you don't, I won't.
I'm Peter Wagner. I'm the director of RSU 5 Community Programs and a resident of Freeport. Yeah, my response to that, Counselor, is that the superintendent of schools is happy to discuss things with members of the town. There's no question about that. The town and school district relationship is really important to everyone in the school district, and so I think that's a perfectly reasonable request.
Thanks.
I'm sure the superintendent would agree.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Wagner while he's up there? No. So I'll move that we approve the request for the use of town property for Freeport Community Programs for August 20th for Memorial Park.
I'll second that.
Thank you, Councilor Lawrence. Any other discussion? All in favor of approving the request?
Aye.
And any opposed? 6-0, that carries as well. Thank you. Thanks for coming. Next up, we have item 143-23, more permits. These are, we have a public hearing regarding 4 special amusement permits for Cadenza, Freeport Oyster Bar, Stars and Stripes, Hilton Garden Inn. This is so they can have music entertainment along with alcohol and liquor. So first, we have a public hearing. I'll move to open the public hearing regarding these special amusement permits.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor of opening the public hearing?
Aye.
6-0. Is there anybody from the public who wants to comment on any of these special amusement permits? Or anybody on Zoom? Seeing none, I'll move to close the public hearing.
Second.
Thank you, Councilor Lawrence. All in favor of closing the public hearing?
Aye.
All right, thank you. And I'll return to our normal procedure here. Councilor Lawrence, if you want to read the be it ordered on this one.
Be it ordered that the special amusement permit renewals for the following business be approved. Cadenza, 5 Depot Street, Freeport Oyster Bar, 43 Main Street, Stars and Stripes, 8 Varney Road, and Hilton Garden Inn, 5 Park Street.
Second.
Thank you, Councilor Daniele. Any discussion? I have one comment that I thought Hilton Garden Inn was asking for a permit for pajamas, but apparently it's not PJs. I think it's DJs that they're looking for. That's my mistake. So if there's no other comments.
With that clarified.
With that clarified, that very important point. All in favor of the motion to grant the special amusement permits?
Aye.
Any opposed? 6-0. Thank you, gentlemen. Next up, item 144-23. This one also has a public hearing. This is regarding Shellfish Conservation Ordinance. This is mostly about adding an additional lottery for any permits that are still not, or licenses that are still not granted after the first lottery, and a couple other minor changes. So, where are we, Councilor Daniele? Do you want to open the public hearing?
Move to open the public hearing.
Second.
All in favor of opening public hearing?
Aye.
That's all of us. Anybody from the public who wishes to comment on the shellfish ordinance changes? Anybody on Zoom?
I move to close the public hearing.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you, Councilor Lawrence. All in favor of closing the public hearing?
Aye.
Thank you. Councilor Daniele, you want to keep going?
Be it ordered that amendments to Chapter 32 Shellfish Conservation Ordinance to add provisions for an additional lottery and the amendment of the minimum age requirements be approved.
Second.
All in favor? Oh, sorry. I need discussion. This is a big one. The discussion around the shellfish conservation ordinance. Do you want to hear a recap of what we're doing? We talked about it a little bit last meeting. Yeah. Councilor Bradley?
I don't have a comment, question. It seemed to me that what we're doing is adding an opportunity for the town to issue a license that was not picked up in the initial lottery. And I just wonder why we have to go through a lottery to do that. Why can't that just be the town clerk or the town manager just issue it, to anybody the first person who comes up after that opportunity? It sounds like another process that this town will go through to do something that we may not need to do. So that was the question I had.
So right now, we have one student resident license. I've already had 2 inquiries of interest in that one license, and that's why we would need to have a lottery, because we could not just decide, we couldn't just pick who we wanted to issue it to. It needs to be.
If you did what I suggested, you could just have granted it to the first person who showed up. If they happened to show up on the same day, then you could have,
They both showed up on the same day.
and then toss a coin. But that's my point.
Okay, well, we don't want to be in that, the clerk's office doesn't desire to be in that situation. I'd prefer to just run a second lottery and have it be.
I withdraw my question.
Just out of curiosity, how many licenses do we grant each year, resident, non-resident, student, roughly?
About 40 adult commercial, 20 non-resident commercial, 20 non-resident PEC, 7 non-resident commercial. We have 180 resident recreational licenses. And then 3-day licenses could be any number. but-
Got it. So, all right. And the Shellfish Commission decides how many, and they tell you this is how many we think you should do this year?
They make the proposal to DMR. It's sent up to them for approval every year. So they actually set our numbers. We just send up the request.
Got it. Part of the reason I ask is not to do with the ordinance tonight, which I think is fairly simple and I support, but I got a letter from the chair of the Shellfish Commission by email, and they're very eager to meet with us. They say, "We're experiencing the biggest ecological crisis in Freeport's history and need to know what the council intends, if anything, to do about it." It seems as though the council has forgotten about the shellfish program. We haven't been invited to any work sessions, and so forth. So they're eager to do a work session with us and talk about their recommendations and issues and things like that. So I wanted to run it by you guys. It's another meeting. It seems like a one that's very important. So I'm all for trying to do that and find a date in the next month or two.
What's the ecological disaster? How was it described?
I don't know in detail. I do have another email from the harbor master with some further ordinance change recommendations, but I believe there's more in addition to what the ordinance changes are that they want to do. So I'll certainly get that information to you before we meet, but just to give you a heads up that they're very eager to meet with us. So I'll dig up as much information as I have and send it your way and propose a workshop for that.
Who was it they contacted?
Chad Coughlin, who I think is the chair. I'm not 100% sure, but I'm pretty sure he's the chair of the, yeah, he is the chair of the Shellfish Commission. So with that as background that's not directly relevant to tonight's ordinance changes, any discussion on the additional lottery and minimum age changes for tonight?
I just want to know, I believe that DMR will have to review these changes. I don't think they're substantial enough that they would be concerned. I was waiting for clarification from Charlie, but haven't heard back. Are you aware of that?
Every shellfish
Yep.
ordinance has to be approved by DMR.
After we approve it? And it's just, okay,
Well, we don't have
the
to,
other way around.
I think if you were doing something substantial or that we thought they would be concerned with, we'd try to get an advisory opinion from them beforehand. In this case, there wasn't concern.
and I think that's the
But
case
we
with
still need to do
with
it.
the other ordinance changes, right? The ones.
Yeah, that's the case. The Shellfish Conservation Commission feels like they want to make some changes or do some things that DMR wouldn't allow, which is why they want to kind of talk to the council about them first in the workshop.
Good.
Does DMR charge us to look over the ordinances, or is that just a service they provide?
It's a service they provide.
Thank you.
All right. I believe we have read this motion already, right? Jake, you read it? Okay. So, right, this is the one I kind of jumped the gun on. So if there's no other discussion, all in favor of the ordinance changes?
Aye.
Any opposed? Carries 6-0. Okay, we've got 2 items left. Next is, and then we have other business executive session as well. But the 2 items to vote on, item 145-23 regarding the Freeport Business Fit Up Grant Program, which we talked a little bit about at our last meeting. Back before us tonight, this time the motion is to actually approve the program as it was presented by Brett Richardson, our FEDC Executive Director. Do you all want a recap of the program? Maybe for the public benefit, it might be nice to kind of do a high-level overview. Brad, if you're willing.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for the opportunity. Brett Richardson, Executive Director of the Freeport Economic Development Corporation. Thanks for the opportunity to bring the Business Fit Up program back in front of you tonight. We had a good discussion last time, and I'll provide the recap as requested. The Business Fit Up Grant Program, this is to deploy funding that was allocated by the town for this fiscal year, $60,000 to do work related to the downtown vision. and fostering a business community in the downtown area. So these funds this program is really based on best practices of similar programs that are used around the region, the state, and the country to deploy funding that will leverage private investment. So this grant program, the goals of it are to activate, underutilized spaces, to create a local food scene, and to help recruit local businesses to town and facilitate that investment into our downtown. One-to-one match is required. The way the program is structured, it would be a reimbursement. So the administration of it is the applicant, which could be a business owner or a property owner, gets a couple of quotes for a project that will help activate a space or achieve one of the other important program goals around business niches, and then present those bids in an application. The town would have a review committee that would be representative and knowledgeable to review the applications to make sure that they fit with the program. And if they do, then the applicant would get a notice to proceed. They go ahead and execute the work, and then when the work's complete, they come back for a reimbursement from the town with proof that the project was executed in compliance with the scope of work. So there's a lot of best practices around how to administer the program and making sure that we're spending the money in a wise way, and that what we're approving is actually carried out before the funding is deployed. That's a kind of the overview of it. A couple of key changes that were made based on feedback from our previous conversation. We included new businesses, to recruit new businesses to town as a key priority in the selection committee. And then we also, from the last time we spoke, we expanded the geography. There was some desire to include the commercial zones, go beyond downtown, and include Route 1 South and other commercial areas in the eligible geographic area. So the updated program incorporates those changes, and would love to get approval so that we can put together the administrative packet in collaboration with the town finance director, so she's comfortable with all the administrative steps that are involved in it, and then get to work promoting the program. And the application would be from October 1 through November 15th, I believe, which is important because it allows projects to be approved and then give folks time over the fall and the winter to execute that so they're ready to go in the spring, activating those new spaces. Happy to take any questions.
Councilor Pillsbury.
Thanks for addressing the changes from last time. My one other comment from the previous meeting, do we have any concern? It's a limited pool of money, right? And from my perspective, I'd love to see it used in a really targeted way. And I think we've outlined that in the selection criteria, but do we want to limit it to small businesses or businesses that wouldn't otherwise be able to take on these projects? I mean, I'm just thinking, how would we feel? I don't want to pick on any individual business, but what about like a major coffee retailer in town coming in and applying for a grant and then using funds that maybe wouldn't be available for some other locally owned small business? I'm just trying to think through scenarios where the money might not go where it's intended or could do the most good.
Yep, it's a good point. And I had a chance to think about that and recalled my experience managing a program like this in the past. And my experience was that if a business has resources, they're not going to want to spend a lot of time in a town process. They're not going to spend a lot of time before a committee talking in front of a group. So in my experience, it's de facto small businesses because they really need the resources to invest to make it happen. And then the other way to think about that, from my perspective, is that if we have a space that's dormant now, and somebody comes in and puts the investment in to activate that space, if that grantee moves on, that space will be improved for the next tenant. So in some ways, especially if we think about a food business, a coffee shop that would put in a hood or extra wiring, extra plumbing, that's going to be there for the next business that moves into that space. So typically small businesses apply for this because they truly need it, and they're willing to come into town hall and do the work that it takes to get that money. And then two, we're kind of thinking about this as an infrastructure play, too, where you're fitting up spaces that will be activated for a period of time, regardless if the original grantee is the tenant for the long term.
I mean, that's fair. Would it be reasonable to say, let's revisit this in a year and see who's utilized the money, if we can change some of the criteria, if it's not meeting the intended goal?
Definitely, definitely. And, when we put together the committee, we can fine tune this a little bit in terms of what the expectation is around that. This is really designed to be an outward-facing document that we can take to property owners and pitch the program. There's some additional work that will take place to really kind of hone in on how that committee operates. And so that's a great point, and we can bake that into the operations.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Other questions for Brett? Councilor Bradley, are you interested in reading this motion?
Sure. Be it ordered that the town council approve the Freeport Business Fit Up Grant Program as presented by Brett Richardson of FEDC.
Second.
Thank you, Councilor Lawrence. Any other discussion? No? I think it's a great program. I'm excited about it. I'm curious to see who will take advantage of it and where it goes and how it does, and thanks for putting it together. I appreciate the time you put into it. So with that, all in favor of the program?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Thanks very much.
Unanimously. Thank you, Brett. Our last action item is 146-23 regarding funding for the Historical Society. Funding for the Historical Society of $10,000, which we would propose taking out of ARPA funds, and Carolyn will give us some background on that.
Sure. So last February, the town council had a annual workshop with the Historical Society, and I guess at that time there was some discussion about their funding requests to the town of Freeport and how their operations work. This year, during the budget process, which started in mid-March, due to all the outside agencies that were interested in requesting funding, you guys went to using a new form that all nonprofit agencies had to submit if they wanted to ask for funding in FY24. A form was not submitted from the Historical Society and therefore not considered. I think there was some unclarity that they had to submit a form since they had previously talked about this with the council. Long story short, they did not receive funding in this year's operating budget, which is something that they rely on as an organization. Eric had reached out. A solution that Jessica Malloy had come up with that might work is that you still have some ARPA funding available. There's a note on the agenda and some information in your packet. You have about $133,000 left in there to appropriate over the next 17 months. In this case, the request is for $10,000 of that. And Eric Smith is here from the Historical Society. I'm sure he could give you some additional background if that's needed.
Thank you. Any questions on this? I know we talked about this once at a previous meeting as well. Councilor
Is this to
Lawrence,
do addition to what we pay for being a member? Or is this,
yeah, you want to come up to the podium, Eric, and introduce yourself?
My name is Eric Smith. I'm the Executive Director of Freeport Historical Society. No, that is what this is. And just to provide a little bit of additional history, because I can't help myself. In previous years with previous councils, the council was adamant that the town did not fund nonprofit organizations, with the exception of social service organizations. And so there was a form for social service organizations, is my understanding, but not for other nonprofits because the town did not fund other nonprofits. As we continue to make the case that the Historical Society does essentially do work on behalf of the town, that we incur costs on behalf of the town to preserve and store documents for which we are the repository and provide staff to help researchers access those documents. That is when the town several years ago decided that they would fund the Freeport Historical Society. And it was written in to an administrative line of the budget which meant that we sort of became one of the groups that the council regularly holds those spring workshops with. And we would normally meet with you during the budget process. It just so happened that this year, I received an email from Christine Wolf on February 9th saying that there was an opening to meet at a workshop on February 14th. And otherwise, it would have been later in March during the budget process. I met with you, which up until this year, that was the sole process for requesting that fund, was that workshop and that conversation with you. And I believe just within a week or two after was when it became public that the town manager was leaving, which started quite a lot of transition. And so I was, having already had that meeting with you, was unaware of that change in the budgeting process.
Thanks for that background. Any other questions, concerns? I think it's pretty straightforward, and thanks for being patient as we kind of rejiggered our process this year. Glad we're able to have an opportunity to address it. Councillor Egan, do you want to read this motion?
Be it ordered that the town council approve funding the Freeport Historical Society $10,000 out of ARPA funds.
Second.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Any last minute questions on this one? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That carries unanimously, so thank you again. for your
Thank you.
patience.
And I just want to say thank you both to Jessica and to Caroline and to the chair for coming up with the solution. I recognize that it is essentially out of order, but we will rectify that in the future. And I did just want to also note for historical reference that while this may be the first scheduled stop for a president, FDR, I think, did have Secret Service detail on his drives back and forth on Route 1 to Campobello. So we certainly have had both George Herbert Walker Bush and Franklin Delano Roosevelt in Freeport before last Friday.
Didn't George Washington sleep at the Jameson Tavern, too?
Doubtful. Awesome. Thank you, Eric. All right. So that's the last listed item on our agenda, but I just want to give a heads up before people turn their TVs off and go home. We may have an opportunity to set a workshop, probably in August, regarding housing. So if people are interested in that, stay tuned, because if we do that, we should take a vote to set that workshop. So there may be one more vote to take tonight. But that's a little premature, because first we have to talk about our other business item, which is an update on recommendations from the Housing Committee, which I'm going to turn over to Councillor Egan to introduce.
Sure. So at our meeting last week, you all got a copy of recommendations from the Housing Committee, which had been working for several months on reviewing our land use ordinance and rules for finding ways to promote development of more housing in our community. And the group felt strongly about the priority list that came forward. And so there was an initial 5 and then another 5 or so after that. But there's a lot to it, and there's a lot of work that's gone into that review. And this is just the start of what we're hoping can be some action taken to upgrade and update our land use ordinances. And I think that the primary focus of that, in the context of what conversations we had up here, was to try and accelerate to getting to a public conversation about it so that we could get something moved along. The planning board, which goes through its deliberative process, has plenty of other things that they're working on. And so I think that the key element of the impetus of last week's presentation of recommendations was to hopefully get the council to endorse having a public workshop with the planning board, hopefully in August, and then probably another one in September, to start a public conversation about these changes that we're talking about. So we have examples of let's say, in contrast, the lengthy process that our dedicated folks on the planning board go through to examine land use recommendations. ADUs and cannabis are two examples, and those are in the works. And I think that the focus on trying to address some opportunities, some low-hanging fruit, so to speak, for promoting some more activity to get higher density housing, particularly in downtown, was the reason for this. And that's why we'd like to see if we could schedule a workshop with the planning board, hopefully in the month of August, so that we can at least start the conversation, be a public and open workshop, and talked with Caroline earlier today about a potential schedule and how that might sort of come together. So I don't know if you have anything to add there, Caroline, about sort of
yes.
sequence and what it might look like.
So I like the idea of workshopping with the planning board and the council. Thank you. The planning board did have a workshop with the housing committee, in which the housing committee talked about some of their ideas, but they never had their own discussion or took action or anything like that. So I think having the planning board come together with the council in a group setting and review those recommendations could be beneficial to potentially move some discussions forward while we have other land use projects going on all around us. One of the things we did pre-COVID was have a small working group on some design review components that had 2 members of the project review board, 2 members of the planning board, 2 members of Freeport Economic Development Corporation, and some staff, and they kind of looked at some things of design review that could be low-hanging fruit. I think we're talking about some different things here, but that being said, having a small group sit around a table and dig into some of the low-hanging fruit to bring forward, I think could be an effective way to bring some change forward in a quicker way. Once we have some initial discussion and hear from the community and what they think of some of the recommendations, and give people an opportunity to ask questions about what was contained in the housing committee recommendations. Some of the housing committee recommendations are already going to be absorbed into ongoing work the planning board's doing under the LD 2003 required changes for housing, but others are not. And of course, design review is a standalone ordinance, not in zoning. So that's kind of a separate project that could be taken on while we're waiting to update the entire ordinance.
Caroline, do you think it's possible that the small working group process that you just described could be sort of front and center, or at least on the table at this proposed workshop that we're trying to organize, and could then sort of be handed some to-do lists, some activities from the group discussion that we're hoping to promote?
I think if the council has interest in having a small working group, I think we could reach out to each of those boards and see if they have 2 people that would be present and make some sort of a commitment to, meet weekly or a couple times a month over the next month or 2 to work through some of the public comments and the recommendations and to bring something forward to you, starting with a public workshop.
Yeah, great.
Councilor Bradley, is that a hand? Yeah.
Public input's always good. I mean, it's the chalice, let's drink from public input. But we're here talking about this because there was a very startling recommendation from the housing group to exempt housing from project review ordinances because of the need to get housing in the downtown in order to promote the downtown visioning process. So
Technically, the request was to exempt new construction. It didn't
whatever.
specify.
I won't
Well,
be.
that's a big distinction, because
Okay.
it doesn't have to be housing.
Oh, well, it was housing, and it was because of 22 Main Street, and that was the answer to all the questions that were asked. You can broaden it to whatever extent you want.
I'm just
but-
pointing out the distinction.
I get it. If you want to make my comments, make them. But at this point, what I'm saying is that it seems to me that getting the groups together to have a workshop to determine what to do with respect to the things that we know need to be done is an unnecessary delay. another kind of situation in which, you know, even though we know what we need to do, we aren't going to do it until some other people say it's okay. I would say, let's do what we talked about doing at the last meeting, which is to set up an executive sewer-like committee process, which has the people on it that you need to have on it. Sit them down with what the principal group ideas were, what the housing group ideas are, and have them in short order come back here with recommendations to council for implementation in ordinance changes in a 2 or 3 month period. If it wasn't for the fact that we had lost maybe a project and that the response was let's do away with the ordinance provisions that caused that to be turned away, we probably wouldn't be having this discussion at all, in my view. But I am convinced by what the housing group said that it's a critical moment for downtown. We have plenty of time to redo the whole ordinance over time, just maybe it's a comprehensive plan process. I don't know, I'm not acutely aware enough to know all the processes that go into planning to know the right way to do it. But there is an acute moment now, I think. And I would like to see us, instead of going through hearings or public meetings to determine what to do, for the council to say, this is what we want to do. We want a group of qualified people from planning, FEDC, the council, the revision, the ordinance committees, to come together in a 2 or 3 month period and come back to us with recommendations, and you can call them low-hanging fruit, but the things that will get people into the process for housing in the downtown, and leave it at that for now, and leave the broader issues for a process that we know we're going to go through in the next year or two. I'm sorry, John, to be so, but what I sense is that what we like to do up here is, I don't want to call it kick the can, but to involve so many people that it takes much longer than it need to when we have a specific need and interest that we can define. Thank you.
Councilor Pillsbury.
Can I ask a question just to clarify? Are we talking about having a workshop and public input on the priorities that were set, or just around ordinance changes and design review process? Because I think that there's a larger issue as well about the lack of definition around the housing stock and the type of housing, specifically affordable housing. And I think there's some public comment and some change that needs to be done to help address that. Because I think that when we went through the process, the visioning process, it was to promote housing, but it was also to target the type of housing our community needs. And I don't believe that leaving that up to the market is going to solve that problem. I thought we had talked about having a housing study done to say, this is our inventory, and then making strategic decisions based on the type of housing we wanted to promote and go after. And that would inform how we address ordinance languages or TIF districts or incentives. Because if we don't know what we want to incentivize for housing, how can we create a plan to get there? And I just don't want to miss the opportunity and just open this up and just have more development of housing of types that we don't need, or really that's going to get us where we want to go.
Councilor Lawrence.
But I think that's what he was talking about last week, is that the housing that we need is between affordable housing and, well, we have really low-income housing, and we have really high-income housing. We don't have any in between. And that's what he was talking about, getting that in here. And the issue that I see is that our ordinance is very subjective. Case in point, that building that is not being built now, because some of the town thought it was okay. The other side of the town said, no, we don't want it in here, and it ended up not being built. But the ordinance itself is very subjective, so it makes it opinions. And that's what we're trying to get away from.
Yeah, but I would just counter by saying, if we don't know exactly the type of housing, like what type of density, what size, what price range that we want to do, how are we going to incentivize the market to bring us that? What the market's going to come is what's profitable to the developer. And that may be fine, but I think that leaves us in a position where this is our chance to target specific housing projects and incentivize those, and otherwise we're just going to get what we get. And I don't think that gets us any further toward what we set out in the visioning process. And I think that when I read the recommendations, I think there's a lot of quality recommendations there, but I think there's some gaps. And I think that my read of it didn't lead me to believe that implementing all 5 or 10 of them was going to get us where we need to go. That's just my opinion. But I just worry that this is our opportunity, and if we don't get it right, we will have done a disservice to the town.
I'll offer a comment and a question. The comment mostly to what Councilor Bradley had mentioned. We don't do anything without public input by charter, by policy. The alternatives that I see are we can have I'll call it a large public workshop, followed by a small working group to iron out the details, and then bring something to council for us to act on, which we would also do in public. I still think we can do that whole thing within 2 or 3 months, so I don't see it as delaying the process. The alternative, if we start with a small group just to work out the details, and then sort of, which would also happen in public, but if we then open it up to public hearings and public comments after that, we may have to go back and rejigger all those things that we ironed out and all those details. So I prefer to kind of see what the lay of the land is. I know there's a lot of public interest germinating about the topic, and I don't want to say, hold your thoughts while we come up with all the details. I'd rather say, give us all your thoughts. Let us work out the details, and then we'll come back and again, discuss in public. So I'm for doing the public workshop followed by hashing out the details. When we do the public workshop, I would also want to invite the project review board, since they're the ones who implement the ordinance, and they're the ones who have to kind of wrestle with, what did you mean by this language? Can you be more clear about that language? So I think having their input would be good as well. So it would be the council, the planning board, and project review. That was my comment. My question is for the housing committee, and I'll ask John since he was there. It's been brought up over the last week or so that when we established the housing committee, affordable housing was one of the things we asked it to look at. Mm-hmm. So was that the spirit of the discussion that the housing committee had? Was it specifically around affordable housing, or was it how that fits in with other housing, or how did that come into play?
The short answer is, yeah, affordable housing was definitely part of the conversation, and every member of the committee, I think, to a person, was focused on making sure that that is part of the conversation. But the group felt, and I think I'm reflecting this accurately, that at this point, nothing's getting built. And we actually have a significant amount of data, Matt. I'm all for it in terms of understanding where our market is. Freeport Housing Trust actually has a significant amount of data on affordability in the community, number of units, what the rents are, how far out of whack they are with market. I should say how skewed they are from market. And where affordability levels are for anything that's related to a wage that you might earn in this community. So there's plenty of data for that. Maine State Housing Authority, or Maine Housing, also has a lot of data to show what our numbers are. That's a little less accurate because it's lagging data, so it's looking at 21 and 22, and the market has changed dramatically in the last 18 months. And then realtors also have a significant amount of data. So I think pretty quickly, we wouldn't necessarily need a study. I think we just need to call in the folks that have this data and assemble it. And I would be happy to do that to help the committee pull that in so that we have that information. The absolute big challenge is there's nothing being built right now. And at this point, not a lot coming forward. So we don't have an opportunity to have any conversation about how many affordable units can we have in X and Y when there's zero production, and either planned or discussed. So I think part of the conversation around affordability is it's quite a surgical, I do this in my day job, it's quite a surgical process to be able to get those incentives right, to where you're working with the market and you're working with the private developers who are going to build the projects that you want to see in your community. There's a lot of give and take, and the 7 of us up here saying we want this and we want that without having it sort of in a process with really what's going to work in a project and with the funding that comes with those projects, it's difficult to sort of nail it and say, yeah, we want 7 of these and we want 22 of those and we want it at this level, when we don't understand all of the complexities that would go into various. I'm not stalling this at all. I'm just saying I think that's a subsequent conversation after we get to the point of deciding how we're going to have higher density is really the bottom line. We need higher density than the town is ever used to seeing, and that's going to be a polarizing issue. We can talk about how we want density in various parts of the community, whether it's downtown or in other areas that are not zoned residential, but as soon as we talk about allowing a density in a particular program, everybody that lives near that's going to have a reaction because it's different than what they're used to seeing. That's a very common dynamic in many, many Maine communities. So I think to step into that, we have to be aware of sort of what wire we're grabbing onto here and how much voltage is in it in terms of finding out what really needs to happen. And that, frankly, was part of the reason why I wanted to have a public hearing about the conversation, so that we can get all of that stuff out on the table and have some back and forth and some dialogue about how we're going to move forward as a community, because right now, nothing is being built.
Councilor Bradley?
I mean, it seems to me like we're talking about two different kinds of processes. One is, sort of the comprehensive approach to housing or development wherever it occurs in town. We should get all people in front of us who have any ideas about that, take them, process them, and work them into a solution. My experience in this town forever has been you have those kinds of hearings, nobody shows up. The people show up only when their ox is being gored and there's a project in their neighborhood that affects them negatively, and then they show up in droves. So if we hadn't been through the downtown revision process, where a principal group put together basically a roadmap to the kinds of things that you could objectivize your zoning by, if we didn't say that in downtown revisioning that housing is the key to it, to bring people downtown is the key to the experience that we're trying to promote down there. We know that's what it is. Any housing would be better than what's going on right now. And so that doesn't mean it gets approved, but it just means that you take away the things that are subjective and that are inhibitory in the first instance. And we seem to know a lot about those things. You talk about it. It doesn't take long to do an inventory. It doesn't take long to put together what the housing committee said or what principal group said. There's a principal group person who's on board already. You could do all of this thing lickety-split, get it done, and then get your public input in response to a specific, as opposed to work from the general to a specific, then out to the community to get more input, because that's what's going to happen, because public input is so valued here. We know enough to do this now. If you think you can get, John, what you have put on the table done in 2 or 3 months, I'll be surprised, but I'd be happy to see it done. I'm one vote. I'm not going to vote for that, but on the other hand, I'll support anything that's necessary to get it done, including funding. I think the Housing Committee raised a critical issue to the downtown development. They did it, they had an extreme way to achieve that, I thought, but the point they made was well taken. We got it, and you're making the same point. There's nothing going on with housing, and it's the key to the downtown that we have worked on now for 3 years and spent $500,000 to develop. So I see your general ideas about public input as taking too long. I think we don't need to go through it. If we're going to go through it, let's do whatever we can to make it work.
My suggestion is if we do it, I would, we kind of looked at the calendar just before the meeting started and looking at a date that is 3 weeks out from today, August 22nd, which would be a Tuesday evening at 6 o'clock, to invite the council, the planning board, project review board, and the public to a workshop. Talk about starting with that housing committee recommendations, and talk about affordable housing as well, and just what blockers exist to building housing in and near downtown.
And are you expecting, or would you envision having the housing committee there to present these recommendations again, or?
I think it would be useful. The last guy who presented the recommendations from the housing committee was also on the planning board. So he would be there.
There's a
and-
key motive of the
Yeah.
committee was to get a workshop,
Yeah.
get a conversation going so we can have the items out on the table and figure out what's good.
Right, there's one of the recommendations, wasn't it, was to have a joint workshop?
Yeah. And I would say that the, what's been perceived as a provocative first recommendation was, this is part of the result. Is we got some action, we're going to get some conversation, and that's not necessarily how it's going to end up, I'm sure. And maybe not even anywhere near like that as it ends up, but it gets the conversation. And so I think we're actually saying the same thing, Ed, and maybe not going through exactly the same steps, but the committee, at least from my perspective, sitting on the committee, there were lots of other voices there, and I was doing mostly listening, not talking, was we have to take some action. So I think we're both in agreement there.
But when the committee, may I speak at a
Yeah,
meeting?
yeah.
So when the committee came to us, they said, we have this provocative, they didn't call it provocative, it was provocative to those of us who absorbed it. We have this suggestion, and we think we need it because going through the process of doing the revisioning of ordinances and processes that we need to do in order to encourage, send a different message about our interest in housing is going to take a long, long time. And so that's why I came forward saying, let's do a sewer-like committee process, which worked, actually, in terms of getting something done quickly, that made sense for the downtown, knowing that there's a lot more discussion to go on with the sewer department before anything comprehensive and long-term is going to be achieved. And what I worry about here is that we will, for the greater good, ignore the specific need and the immediate need that was identified by the Housing Committee when they came forward. Now, we're not going to buy the exempt, I don't think. I'm not. Maybe others are. I'm not going to vote for that. But I do want to do whatever we can to respond to their sense of immediacy and the downtown visioning's need for immediacy. It's the key to accomplishing the experiential change in the downtown that we all want and we have paid dearly for. So that's why I'm saying it so strongly. I've thought a lot about it, and I certainly, over the last week, I've gotten as many calls about this provision, these provisions, as anything I've dealt with on the council in the last 3 years. People are paying attention to it, and they'll know what we do.
And they want a chance to be heard, is, I imagine, what they're saying as well.
No, they aren't. Some of them are still going, I mean, they're all
Yeah.
saying different things,
Yeah,
but
okay.
it's a controversial moment.
Yep, yep. So one of the reasons I was suggesting this August 22nd date is it does leave room for a little bit of time in between that and our November 5th meeting? Sorry, September 5th, thank you. September 5th meeting, to do something quickly and bring it back to council. We have a second meeting in September as well. So if we have the workshop on the 22nd, there is some time to still act quickly and get things done in September, before November.
So you think possibly that the idea of getting a focused, small working group looking at the call it low-hanging fruit, the things that we can accomplish immediately can be done by September? And still have the meeting John's talking about, where a larger group comes together and that there'll be some resistance to expanding the scope of everything we're doing to focus down on the, I'm asking.
Potentially, yeah. I can't guarantee it because it's not my call to make, but yeah.
Will that be your call? But John, will that be your input, or would you be thinking if this general meeting opens up the doors to what Matt's talking about and affordable housing and all of those things, as opposed to making a process and objectifying criteria that allow us to make decisions on downtown housing more quickly and more predictably, we would go for the bigger picture, potentially. I would like to resist that. That's what I'm trying to do. That's all I'm trying to say.
Yeah, go ahead, John.
Yeah, again, I think actually we're not that far apart, Ed. I think my particular single voice on the committee is that we have to have a tough conversation because there are serious market forces working against anything happening, and particularly anything that's affordable. So there's 3 of the Housing Committee members sitting in the room here, so I can bring back to that group that we can have a further articulation of recommendations and changes. So I don't think I have as quite a clear an idea in my head as you do about the sewer-like committee. I don't think I have that frame of reference, but the ad hoc Housing Committee can bring all kinds of data and perspectives to this meeting on the 22nd. They're anxious to do that. So I think we could hear a lot more from that group than even the articulated recommendations coming forward. But at least I guess I'm in favor of getting to some quick solutions first, and maybe, maybe it has nothing to do with what's exempt or not exempt, but maybe it's just focusing on fixing some of the language.
Sure.
And if we can do that quickly, then we don't need to have any sort of emergency or urgent action on exemptions. So, but I'm going to rely on Caroline and the planning staff to, keep us in line with what we're actually allowed to do, and we can't just go chuck the ordinance out the window, so.
I understand, but it also, I keep hearing Caroline say, this is in the midst of all the other things that the planning board's got going on and is required to do. And I'm saying, I thought we were going to do is to pull this up out of the mire of ordinary, everyday business and give it a priority, because housing in the generally downtown area turns out to be a critical factor. And I've heard that from so many people from so many different parts of the community, whether it's FEDC or the people on the planning board, or, nobody likes what happened, being their part in what happened over there on 22 Main, because they want housing. They regret that it came up first like that. And so we're looking for a new message to put words in Brett's mouth, or Brett's words in my mouth. One that says we're for housing, and one way to do that is to straighten out our ordinances and our process, shorten it up, not make it any less effective, not undo the protections that exist, but make sure they're predictable and people know what we're looking for, as opposed to, oh my God, anything works because it's so vague, and everybody's entitled to an opinion in our world. So I've said what I'm happy if we can stay focused on the quick turnaround in the small focused effort, knowing that there's much more to do in the world of planning and zoning after that.
Good. Councilor Danielle, you've been patiently waiting.
Yeah, I think our robust conversation shows that we really do need this conversation with the general public. I think soon is great, August is wonderful. I think having some targeted ideas that we come out of it, but then also saying that this is going to become a longer conversation, and this could kickstart that through the comp plan and whatnot. And I think to your concerns, Councilor Bradley, that going through the normal process would be to send it to project reviewer, or what, I don't know actually what the normal process is that it would go through, but it would go to different steps before coming back to us. And by gathering everybody together and making that task force and getting a couple of items and moving it forward, we're going to move things quicker.
That's the
Is the idea,
that's
right?
the
Yeah, so
entire point of why the committee came forward, the ad hoc housing committee came forward with recommendations,
So
was to jump right over that usual circuit that things take a year or 18 months, and I don't think we have that kind of time.
I think my only concern about a workshop is it's right. There's so many other moving targets. We have an RFP out right now for a comprehensive plan update. We have changes required under LD 2003, which is going to impact multiple ordinances and so many sections of that. We are also working on an RFP to update the design review ordinance, not just put some Band-Aids to fix it, to really reflect what our community wants for desired outcomes. So you got these recommendations from the Housing Committee. I'll estimate 10 of them. Top priority number 1, which is getting a reaction from everyone in this room and our community, was a recommendation that certain types of development be exempt from design review. That was their top priority. They then have the other 10 priorities. If we're going to focus on priority 1, I think there's some potential quick fixes that we need to do. We don't have 3 months, Ed. We need to do this faster. We have a whole bunch of other projects. So I do like the strategy of getting some feedback early on, hearing from the community, hearing from our boards and committees that use this ordinance, and be like, hey, here's recommendation 1, top priority. What do you think? Listen to that feedback. While we're in the room, because we're all busy, let's see the other 10 recommendations that they have there, just to get the reaction while we're all in the room, because some of those will pertain to stuff the planning board's doing. I would then picture some small working group taking that feedback, coming back in a couple of weeks with some draft ordinance language. focusing on that top priority number one that the Housing Committee rolled out to you guys last week and we got reactions from. There are other important conversations. The planning board and myself, I think some of the data that the Housing Committee has pulled together is fascinating. Brett, I know, has a lot of that data. I think hearing that would be really educational for the council and everybody in our community. But I see the point of this is really to get feedback and stay focused on that top priority, and while we're in the room, get some feedback on the other ideas, because I think if we go off on a lot of other tangents, it's going to be exactly what some of the concern is. We're not going to get anything done with some of the low-hanging fruit that was identified that we should at least be considering.
Councilor Lawrence?
I think we could have a starting point. We just went through an appeal that failed, or if the appeal
Was reversed.
succeeded or was reversed. That should have come back with recommendations on the process, because from what I understand, appeal's supposed to attack the process. That should have some recommendations on how the process should be fixed, and that could be a starting point or some more information. So that would be a place to start and look.
I recommend that we go to the community center for the workshop, so we have some room.
We're
And we
waiting.
get rid of the up here, down
Yeah,
there
yeah.
kind of dynamic and have everybody on the floor.
Oh, come on, that's the best part.
I had emailed them today, but I don't know that they were there to see if they had any availability later in the month.
Yeah.
I'm waiting to hear back.
Yep.
I don't know if you're taking comment, but you have other people online as well.
I think we'll direct them to the workshop if we can get that scheduled. So with all that, seeing no other hands up here, I'm going to propose a motion that we add to our council schedule a workshop on August 22nd, 2023, jointly with the Planning Board and the Project Review Board at 6 p.m. for now, we'll say in the Freeport Community Center, to discuss the changes regarding housing and land use.
I'll
To
second
include
that.
Thank you,
FEDC.
Councilor Lawrence. And FEDC is welcome as well. Yeah, they're not a town board, but yeah, of course, they're welcome.
In the Housing Committee. You're going to want the
In the
Housing
Housing
Committee
Committee.
there to present.
Yes, thank you. Second still stands after those modifications?
Yes.
Okay. Any further discussion? All in favor of setting that workshop?
Aye.
Any opposed? I think I saw 6 hands there, so that carried.
8:22, 6 p.m.,
22, 6 p.m. at the community center.
Freeport Community Center. If
Unless we-
available, backup can be this room because there's nothing in here that night.
Okay. But if we do here, we'll do it down there. Okay. All right.
Great.
So the only thing remaining on our agenda is an executive session. So we do not intend to come back to vote on anything other than just adjourning after the executive session. So with that, I'll read this motion in, and then we'll deal with shutting down the Zoom and closing the room. But item 147-23 is to consider action relative to an executive session with the town attorney pursuant to 1 MRSA Section 4056E pertaining to a legal matter. So I move that the council enter executive session.
Second.
Thank you, Councilor Lawrence. So we have to do a roll call vote. I think still Councilor Pillsbury.
Aye.
Councilor Lawrence.
Yes.
Councilor Daniele.
Yes.
Councilor Bradley.
Yes.
Councilor Egan.
Yes.
The chair votes yes. So we are now in executive session.
Okay, I
We'll
just.
take a 5-minute break while Tom shuts down.